Hello everyone, my name is Simone, and I'm 42 years old now. This is a story about the company I built, the man I loved, and the moment I had to choose between them. It's about how the sweetest, most satisfying victory of my life came directly from the deepest and most public humiliation I have ever endured. My husband and I founded a logistics company together, but he slowly, methodically pushed me out, telling our board of directors, our friends, that I was too emotionally driven to make the tough calls. He never imagined that my emotions, my passion for the business we built from nothing, would be the very thing that fueled the quiet, meticulous war I waged to take it back. What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world turned your greatest strengths into weapons to be used against you? Before I dive into the story of the boardroom showdown that left everyone speechless, I want to say hello to all of you out there. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been underestimated, belittled, or told you were too much of anything, too emotional, too quiet, too loud, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you're new here, please subscribe. This is a community for people who understand that sometimes you have to save yourself. It all started, as so many things do, with a dream shared over cheap pizza and lukewarm coffee in a cramped apartment that smelled perpetually of old books and fresh hope. Marcus and I were invincible back then. We were in our late 20s, married for 2 years, and possessed that fiery, unbreakable confidence that only youth can bestow. He was the thunder, and I was the lightning. He had the charisma, the booming voice that could command a room, the easy smile that could charm a snake out of its skin. He could sell ice in a blizzard. I, on the other hand, was the quiet architect. I saw the world in systems, in pathways, in efficiencies. My brain was a machine that chewed up chaos and spit out order. While Marcus was out there making promises, I was in the back room, hunched over spreadsheets and logistics software, building the intricate machine that would actually keep those promises. We called our company Apex Logistics. The name was Marcus's idea, of course. Grand, ambitious, and memorable. My idea was something more practical, like reliable freight solutions, which he'd laughed at. "Honey, you don't sell steak," he'd said, ruffling my hair. "You sell the sizzle." It was one of the first times I felt that tiny, almost imperceptible prickle of condescension, but I dismissed it. He was right, wasn't he? We needed his sizzle. For 5 years, it was perfect. We were a symphony of complementary skills. We'd work until 2 in the morning, fueled by coffee and the sheer thrill of building something that was ours. I remember one night, standing in front of a massive whiteboard we'd bolted to our living room wall. It was covered in my spidery handwriting, a complex web of color-coded routes, driver schedules, and fuel consumption calculations for our first major contract. Marcus stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. He traced one of the lines with his finger. "How do you do this?" he whispered, his voice full of genuine awe. "How do you see all of this in your head?" I leaned back against him, my heart swelling with pride. "It just makes sense to me," I'd said. "It's like a puzzle." He kissed my temple. "You're my brilliant, puzzle-solving wife. We're going to be so successful, Simone. Nothing can stop us." In that moment, I believed him. I believed us was an entity as real and solid as the whiteboard in front of me. I was the engine, he was the driver, and we were heading straight for the top. We landed that contract, and it was the first of many. Apex grew. We moved from our apartment to a small, functional office, then to a bigger one. We hired drivers, dispatchers, a small administrative team. And with every new hire, with every new success, a subtle shift began to occur, a change so gradual I almost didn't notice it until it was too late. The first real crack in our perfect partnership appeared during a decision about a software upgrade. It was a technical, unglamorous choice, but a critical one. Our current system was homegrown, a patchwork of programs I'd stitched together. It was time for a professional, scalable solution. I spent weeks researching, running trials, and compiling data. My conclusion was clear. A software called Logicore was the superior choice. It was less expensive, more customizable, and its data integration capabilities were exactly what we needed for the next phase of growth. I prepared a detailed presentation for Marcus, laying it all out. He listened, nodding, but his eyes had a distracted glaze. "This is great, honey. Really thorough," he said when I finished. "But I had lunch with Jeffries from Omnicorp last week. He's a great guy, big golfer. He was telling me about this new suite they use, Aerolux. Says it's the future." I knew of Aerolux. It was flashy, expensive, and loaded with features we didn't need. It was the designer handbag of logistics software. All brand, little substance for a company our size. Marcus, I looked at Aerolux, I said carefully. It's double the price and the user reviews say the support is terrible. Logicore is a better fit for us. The data is all here. He waved a dismissive hand. Data, schmata. Sometimes you have to make decisions based on relationships, Simone. Jeffries is a potential client. Adopting the same software he uses, it builds a connection. It shows we're in the same league. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. But it's a bad business decision. It will hurt our bottom line. He sighed, a patronizing, weary sound. Let me handle the big picture strategy, okay? You're brilliant at the day-to-day, but this is about perception. It's about playing in the big leagues. He chose Aerolux. He announced it to the team as a major step forward, a sign of Apex's arrival. I had to sit there and smile, the Logicore proposal feeling like a lead weight in my laptop bag. And because I loved him, because I still believed in us, and because I hated conflict more than anything, I let it go. I told myself it was just one decision. I told myself he was probably right about the relationship angle. It was a mistake I would come to regret bitterly. That one decision became a blueprint. Marcus started having what he called pre-meetings with our small but growing board of investors, most of whom were his contacts. He'd come back to the office and announce a new initiative as a done deal. Good news! Eleanor Vance loves the idea of expanding into refrigerated transport, he'd declare. Eleanor was an early investor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had initially been impressed with my operational plans. But now Marcus was her sole point of contact. My role began to shrink, defined by his casual dismissals in public meetings. Simone will handle the nitty-gritty on that, he'd say, gesturing to me as if I were a glorified clerk. Or, I'll take the lead on strategy, Simone's team will execute. He was painting a picture for the board, for our employees, and even for me. He was the visionary, the leader. I was the helper. The one who made the trains run on time, but who certainly couldn't be trusted to design the railroad. My stomach was in a constant state of low-grade turmoil. The joy I once felt coming to work was replaced by a gnawing anxiety. I tried to talk to him about it one night, as we were getting ready for bed. Marcus, I started, my voice trembling slightly. I feel like I'm being pushed out. We built this together. It's supposed to be our company. He turned from the mirror, his expression one of pure bafflement, as if I'd just started speaking in a foreign language. Pushed out? Simone, what are you talking about? You're the CEO. You're essential. Then why am I not in the essential meetings? Why are you making strategic decisions without even consulting me? He sat on the edge of the bed and took my hands. His touch, which once felt like an anchor, now felt like a cage. Honey, I'm trying to protect you. The pressure from the board, the endless schmoozing, it's exhausting. It's not your world. You hate that stuff. You love the details, the systems. I'm just letting you focus on what you do best. I'm taking the stress off your shoulders. It was such a masterful piece of manipulation, framing my exclusion as an act of kindness. He was telling me my ambition was a burden he would graciously carry for me. And a part of me, the part that was tired and worn down and still desperately wanted to believe in him, almost accepted it. But another part, a small, resilient flicker of my former self, knew it was a lie. The final, shattering blow came about a year after the Aerolux decision. We were facing a major capital expenditure. It was time to upgrade our aging truck fleet. This was my territory. Fleet management, depreciation schedules, fuel efficiency, maintenance costs. This was the core of the logistical puzzle I loved to solve. I spent 2 months creating a meticulous, multi-phase plan. It involved purchasing a mix of new and certified pre-owned vehicles, staggering the acquisitions to manage cash flow, and choosing a brand known for reliability and low long-term cost of ownership. It was a solid, financially responsible, data-driven plan. I knew Marcus had his own idea. He was infatuated with a new European brand, Zephyr, whose trucks looked sleek and futuristic, like something out of a sci-fi movie. They were also notoriously expensive to buy and repair, with a limited service network in our region. We argued about it the night before the board presentation. It was the worst fight of our marriage. They're a status symbol, Marcus. I pleaded, my voice rising with a desperation I hated. They look good, but they're a financial black hole. My plan saves us nearly $2 million over 5 years. And my plan makes us look like a billion-dollar company. He shot back, his face rigid with anger. You're thinking like a small-time operator, Simone. We have to project success to attract success. Your plan is timid. It's emotional. You're too attached to your spreadsheets and your cautious little numbers. You can't see the big picture. The word hung in the air between us. Emotional. He spat it out like it was a disease. The next day, I walked into the boardroom, my heart pounding. I was naive. I thought we were going to present our two competing plans and have a rational debate. I thought the board would see the clear, logical superiority of my proposal. I was so wrong. Marcus stood at the head of the table, oozing confidence. He didn't even acknowledge my plan. He launched directly into a passionate pitch for the Zephyr fleet, presenting it as our agreed-upon strategy. I sat in my chair, frozen, a wave of cold shock washing over me. He was erasing my work, my voice, in real time. Eleanor Vance, the sharp-eyed board member, turned to me. Simone, what are your thoughts on the maintenance projections for these Zephyr models? It was my opening, my chance to speak up, to present my data. But before I could even form a sentence, Marcus jumped in, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture that looked supportive, but felt like a vice. Simone and I have discussed this at length, he said smoothly, his voice dripping with faux compassion. She gets a little attached to her old systems, you know how it is. He gave a little chuckle, inviting the others to join in. A few of them smiled politely. Frankly, her analysis was a bit, well, we need to be less emotionally driven and more aggressive in this market. I've taken her concerns into account, but ultimately, this is the right strategic move. Emotionally driven. He'd said it again. Not in the heat of a private argument, but in a formal board meeting, in front of our investors, our colleagues. He had taken my passion, my meticulous care for the company's health, and twisted it into a female stereotype, a weakness. He had painted me as a hysterical woman clinging to her spreadsheets while he, the rational man, made the bold, necessary decisions. I looked around the table. No one met my eye. They were all looking at Marcus, nodding, swayed by his charismatic performance. I felt the air leave my lungs. I was utterly, completely humiliated. My voice was gone, stolen from me by the man who had once whispered in my ear how brilliant I was. The vote was a formality. The Zephyr fleet was approved. The car ride home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. The air was thick with my unspoken rage and his smug victory. As we pulled into the driveway of the beautiful house our company had bought us, he finally turned to me, his face a mask of concern. "Are you okay, honey?" he asked, his voice soft. "I know that was tough for you, but I promise it's for the best. You'll see." The gaslighting was so blatant, so audacious, it almost made me laugh. He was trying to soothe the wound he had just inflicted. I didn't say a word. I got out of the car, walked into the house, went straight to my home office, the one where I'd drawn our first routes on a whiteboard, and I closed the door. And then I fell apart. I sank to the floor and sobbed, not just for the humiliation, but for the death of us. The partnership was a lie. The man I loved had sacrificed me for his own ego. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I cried until I was empty, until there were no tears left. And then, in the hollow silence that followed, something else began to glow. A tiny, hot ember of anger. It started in my gut and spread through my veins, burning away the despair. He thought I was too emotional. He thought I was weak. He thought he had won. I stood up, my legs shaky, and went to my desk. I opened a new, encrypted file on my computer. I typed a single word at the top of the blank page. Evidence. He wanted an emotional woman? Fine. But he was about to find out that fury is an emotion, too. And my fury would be cold, calculated, and meticulously documented. My war had just begun. For the next year, I became the greatest actress of my life. I played the part of the defeated wife, the sidelined executive. I smiled placidly in meetings where I was no longer expected to speak. I nodded when Marcus explained his latest visionary move. I even offered meek, half-hearted suggestions that I knew he would swat down, reinforcing his narrative of my incompetence. "That's a good thought, honey, but a little small-scale," he'd say with a pat on my hand, and I would retreat, making sure the board saw my quiet deference. At home, I maintained the facade of a supportive, if slightly wounded spouse. I listened to his boasts about new deals and his complaints about market headwinds. Every condescending word, every patronizing gesture, was a drop of fuel on the fire burning inside me. He thought I was tending to a garden of hurt feelings. He had no idea I was forging a weapon. My home office became my war room. The evidence file grew into a sprawling, multi-tabbed spreadsheet, a digital monument to his hubris. As chief operating officer, even a neutered one, I still had access to everything. The keys to the kingdom were still in my hands. He just never imagined I'd use them. I started with the disastrous decisions I already knew about. The Aerolux software was a goldmine of incompetence. I pulled the usage logs. Half of its expensive, flashy features had never even been activated. I documented the endless string of support tickets from our frustrated dispatchers, the hours of lost productivity due to system crashes, the emergency consulting fees we were paying to fix problems that the LogiCore system I'd originally proposed would never have had. I created a chart that showed the initial cost of Aerolux versus LogiCore, and then I added a second, brutal set of bars showing the ongoing operational costs. The difference was staggering. Marcus had cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars for a piece of software that performed worse than its cheaper competitor. Then I moved on to the Zephyr truck fleet. My predictions had been painfully accurate. The sleek European trucks were breaking down constantly. I pulled the maintenance records and fuel consumption data. They were guzzling diesel at a rate 15% higher than the manufacturer's claims, and parts had to be shipped from overseas, leading to extended downtime for our vehicles. I created a map of our service area and overlaid it with the locations of certified Zephyr mechanics. They were so few and far between that we were paying our own mechanics overtime to travel hundreds of miles for simple repairs. I compared our fleet's on-time delivery percentage from the year before the purchase to the year after. It had plummeted from 98.7% to 89%. We were not only bleeding money on repairs, we were destroying the very reputation for reliability I had spent years building. But these were just the appetizers. Marcus's ego, it turned out, had an insatiable appetite for reckless spending. One evening, while cross-referencing our marketing expenditures, I found a recurring payment for a massive sum to something called Velostang Racing. A quick search revealed it was a floundering, low-tier auto racing team. Marcus had signed a 2-year, 7-figure sponsorship deal to have the Apex Logistics logo plastered on the side of a car that consistently finished in last place. The justification in the marketing proposal, which he had clearly written himself, was filled with buzzwords like high-octane brand synergy and tapping into a demographic of winners. I spent a week tracking the actual return on this investment. I analyzed our website's traffic, our lead generation forms, our social media mentions. The Velostang sponsorship had generated exactly 3 new leads. All of them were from people looking for free tickets to a race. It was a multi-million-dollar vanity project, a way for Marcus to get VIP passes and rub elbows with C-list celebrities at the racetrack. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that made my blood run cold with fury, was the discovery of Greg. I was reviewing the executive payroll, a task I still technically oversaw, when I saw the name Greg Peterson, with the title Vice President of Synergistic Growth, and an annual salary of $300,000. I had never met a Greg Peterson. He wasn't on any organizational chart I had seen. He didn't have an office at our headquarters. I did some digging. It turned out Greg was Marcus's old college roommate. His professional experience, prior to becoming a VP at our multi-million-dollar company, consisted of managing a surf shop in San Diego for 5 years. I pulled his expense reports. They were a caricature of corporate fraud. There were $5,000 dinners in cities where we had no clients, listed as strategic partner development. There were first-class flights to Aspen for a synergy and innovation conference that didn't exist. There was a monthly lease on a luxury car. Greg was a ghost, a complete parasite, and his only function was to drain money from our company and funnel it into his and Marcus's lavish lifestyle. I meticulously documented every single expense, cross-referencing them with company travel policies, the very policies I had written years ago. Greg's entire employment was a violation of at least a dozen of them. I had my ammunition, a mountain of it, but data alone wasn't enough. A spreadsheet can't vote. A chart can't speak. I needed allies, and building those alliances would be the most delicate and dangerous part of my plan. I had to turn the people Marcus had either alienated or taken for granted, and I had to do it without ever revealing my hand. One misstep, one misplaced word, and he would hear about it. My first target was Arthur Kowalski. Arthur was our operations director, a gruff, 60-something veteran of the trucking industry who had forgotten more about logistics than Marcus would ever know. He was old school, a man who believed in hard work, common sense, and functional systems. He had been with us since the early days and had a deep, quiet respect for the way I'd originally designed our operations. I knew he loathed the new Aerolux software and the illogical routes Marcus's big picture thinking had forced on his teams. I found him one afternoon in the cavernous quiet of the main warehouse, watching a forklift load a pallet. He smelled of coffee and diesel fuel. I approached him casually, feigning a look of concern. "Arthur, got a minute?" He grunted, not taking his eyes off the forklift. "For you, Simone. Always." That one word, always, told me everything I needed to know. His loyalty was to me, or at least to the version of Apex that I represented. "I'm worried about the team's morale," I said, keeping my voice soft. "I'm hearing a lot of grumbling about the new routing software. The drivers are frustrated." Arthur finally turned to look at me, his weathered face a mask of deep-seated frustration. "Frustrated is putting it mildly. The new system is garbage. It sends my guys on wild goose chases. It doesn't account for traffic patterns, construction, nothing. It's designed by people who've never sat in the cab of a truck. My fuel costs are through the roof, and my best drivers are threatening to quit." He was practically vibrating with pent-up anger. I just listened, nodding, letting him vent. This was his pain point, the daily, grinding irritation of being forced to implement a stupid decision made by an arrogant boss. When he was done, I placed a hand gently on his arm. "I hear you, Arthur. I really do. It's just, Marcus is so convinced it's the right way forward." I let my voice trail off, injecting a note of helpless resignation. "I wish someone would listen to the people who actually do the work." I finished, my voice barely a whisper. I saw a flash of something in his eyes, a flicker of the old fire. "You always did, Simone," he said, his voice low and firm. "You always listened. I had him. I hadn't asked for anything, I hadn't revealed my plan, but I had just recruited my first soldier. I knew that when the time came, Arthur would stand behind a plan that was built on logic and respect for his team. He would be my testament to the operational chaos Marcus had created. My next target was at the opposite end of the spectrum from Arthur. Chloe Zhang was a brilliant, 24-year-old data analyst I had hired straight out of university. She was a wizard with numbers, a quiet introvert who could make spreadsheets sing. I knew for a fact that she had been producing reports for months that clearly showed the negative trends in our key performance indicators, because she was required to copy me on them. I also knew that Marcus had dismissed her work in a management meeting as overly pessimistic and lacking a can-do attitude. He was intimidated by the unvarnished truth of her numbers. I called her to my office one afternoon, closing the door behind her. She sat down nervously, clutching her tablet like a shield. She probably thought she was about to be fired for being the bearer of bad news. I decided on a direct approach. "Chloe," I began, my voice calm and even. "I've been reading your last 3 quarterly analyses. The ones Marcus called pessimistic." I saw her flinch. "I want you to know that I don't think they're pessimistic. I think they're honest. And I think they're brilliant." The relief that washed over her face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. Her shoulders, which had been hunched up around her ears, relaxed. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just report what the data shows." "I know you do," I said, leaning forward. "And I know he's been ignoring it. So I want to ask you for a favor. A confidential one. I want you to keep running the numbers. But I want you to run them for me off the books. I want you to model a different scenario. What would our performance look like if we had never bought the Zephyr fleet? What would our profitability be if we had chosen the Logicore software? I want you to build me a picture of the company we should have been." Her eyes widened, a spark of excitement and intrigue replacing the fear. She finally understood. I wasn't a part of Marcus's regime. I was the opposition. "Yes," she said, her voice firming with newfound purpose. "I can do that. I already have most of the baseline data. I've been running those models for myself." Of course she had. She was a true analyst. She couldn't help but seek the truth in the numbers. Chloe became my secret weapon, my intelligence officer. Every few days, a discreet, password-protected email would arrive in my inbox, filled with the devastating, beautiful clarity of her data. She was building the statistical foundation of my coup. The final piece of my alliance strategy was the most dangerous. I needed a voice on the board. I needed Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was in her late 60s, a self-made millionaire who had built her own manufacturing empire from the ground up. She was sharp, pragmatic, and had a low tolerance for incompetence. But she was also susceptible to Marcus's charm. He had cultivated their relationship carefully, playing golf with her, remembering her husband's birthday, feeding her a steady diet of optimistic projections. Attacking Marcus directly would be a fatal mistake. She would see it as a bitter wife's complaint, and it would backfire. I had to use his own weapons against him. I invited her to lunch at a quiet restaurant, framing it as a personal catch-up. "It's been so long, Eleanor. I feel like all we ever talk about is work, I'd said on the phone. She agreed, her voice warm. I spent the first half of the lunch asking about her family, her recent travels, anything but Apex. Then, as the coffee arrived, I sighed, letting my shoulders slump. I summoned every ounce of my acting ability to look like the worried, overwhelmed woman Marcus had told her I was. I'm sorry to be a downer, Eleanor, I said, staring into my cup. It's just, I'm so worried about Marcus. And the company. This immediately put her on alert, but in a sympathetic way. Worried? Why? He seems to have everything under control. He's very confident about the new direction. Oh, he is, I said quickly as if defending him. He's working so hard, putting on such a brave face for everyone. But the pressure is getting to him. And the numbers. I know he says they're just temporary setbacks, but I trailed off, shaking my head slightly. I was planting a seed of doubt, but wrapping it in concern for my husband. What numbers? She asked, her tone shifting from friendly to analytical. Oh, I'm probably just being silly, I said, waving a dismissive hand. You know me. Too emotional, like he says. I get bogged down in the details. I let the phrase hang in the air, his own words, now repurposed by me. But our client retention rate has dropped nearly 15% since we onboarded the new fleet. And our operational costs are up by almost 20%. Did he mention that? I delivered the lines with a perfect blend of anxiety and naivety. I saw the change in her eyes. Eleanor Vance was a woman who understood numbers. A 15% drop in client retention wasn't a detail. It was a 5-alarm fire. No, she said slowly, her brow furrowed. He did not mention that. I had her. I didn't push it. I changed the subject back to her grandchildren. But the seed was planted. I knew she would go back to her office and start asking her own questions, looking at the reports Marcus sent with a new, more critical eye. The charm was about to wear off. For the next 6 months, my life was a split screen. By day, I was the quiet, supportive Simone. By night, I was a general preparing for battle. With Chloe's data and Arthur's operational insights, I built my counterproposal. I didn't just document Marcus's failures. I designed the solution. I resurrected my old Logicorp proposal, updating it with new figures. I created a detailed, phased plan to sell off the disastrous Zephyr trucks and replace them with the reliable models I'd originally recommended. I wrote a new, leaner budget, one that completely eliminated the Velostang sponsorship and the VP of Synergistic Growth. I called it Project Phoenix. It was a blueprint for the resurrection of Apex Logistics. I had it professionally printed and bound into 10 thick, imposing dossiers. 10 copies. One for me, and one for every voting member of the board. The date of the next quarterly performance review was circled on my calendar in bright red ink. D-Day. Judgment was coming. Marcus thought he was walking into a routine meeting to explain away another bad quarter. He had no idea he was walking into his own corporate execution. And I, his emotional wife, would be the one to calmly and precisely pull the trigger. The day of the quarterly board meeting arrived with a cold, metallic tang in the air. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the sky is a brilliant, unforgiving blue. I chose my outfit with the care of a soldier putting on a uniform. Not a power suit, that would be too aggressive, too out of character for the role I'd been playing. Instead, I wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, pearl earrings, and low heels. I looked calm, serious, and utterly unassuming. I was a Trojan horse, and my dowdy, professional attire was my disguise. Marcus, on the other hand, was dressed for a coronation. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, a crisp white shirt, and a bold red tie. He looked like the cover of a business magazine. As we rode the elevator up to the top floor of our ridiculously expensive new office building, another one of his vanity projects, he squeezed my hand. Just follow my lead in there, okay? Let me do the talking. It's going to be a little rough, but I've got a handle on it. Of course, dear, I said, giving him a small, supportive smile. The condescension was so reflexive now, he didn't even notice it. He thought he was calming his nervous wife. He had no idea he was speaking to his executioner. The boardroom was just as he'd designed it, intimidating. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the glittering city skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass walls. It was a room built to make people feel small. The 10 board members were already seated, their faces grim. The preliminary reports had been circulated, and the numbers were, to put it mildly, abysmal. I took my usual seat, slightly back from the main table, the spot that had been implicitly assigned to me over the past year. Marcus took his place at the head of the table, radiating a confidence that, for the first time, struck me as utterly fake. He was terrified, but he was a performer, and the show had to go on. He launched into his presentation, a masterclass in deflection and corporate jargon. The PowerPoint slides were filled with slick graphics and meaningless phrases. Navigating global headwinds, proactive realignment in the face of supply chain disruption, leveraging paradigm shifts for future growth. He spoke about the bad numbers as if they were unfortunate weather patterns that had happened to the company, not because of it. "We took some bold, aggressive swings this year," he said, pacing back and forth, using the room like a stage. "Some didn't connect, but that's the price of innovation. You can't hit a home run if you're afraid to step up to the plate." I watched Eleanor Vance's face. Her expression was like stone. Her eyes were narrowed, and she wasn't looking at Marcus's dazzling slideshow. She was looking at the raw numbers in the report in front of her. My quiet lunch had done its work. The charm was gone, replaced by cold, hard skepticism. Marcus began to wrap up, sensing he was losing the room. "So, while the quarter was challenging," he said, forcing a final bright smile, "our long-term strategic direction remains sound. We are poised for a major rebound in the coming year." He looked around the table, fishing for nods of agreement. He got none. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I let it hang in the air for a full 5 seconds, a pocket of dead time that felt like an eternity. Then I spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but in the profound silence, it cut through the room like a scalpel. "I disagree." Every single head in the room swiveled to face me. It was as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. Marcus froze mid-stride, his confident posture deflating. He turned to me, his expression a mixture of shock and profound irritation. "Simone," he said, his voice tight with forced patience, trying to frame me as a disruptive child. "We can discuss your concerns privately. This isn't the appropriate forum." I looked directly at him, my gaze level and unblinking. The fear I thought I would feel was completely absent, replaced by a strange, icy calm. "Actually, Marcus, it is the appropriate forum," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "According to our original co-founder and shareholder agreement, which I took the liberty of rereading last night, Section 7, Subsection B, states that either founding partner can call for an emergency vote on corporate leadership if they have reason to believe the company is facing existential risk due to gross fiscal or operational mismanagement." I saw a flicker of pure panic in his eyes, a flash of disbelief. He had never, in a million years, considered that I would have the audacity, let alone the legal standing, to challenge him. He had forgotten who wrote the original operational charters for our bylaws. I had. He saw me as the emotional wife. He had forgotten I was also the meticulous architect. Before he could cobble together a response, I stood up. I felt a surge of adrenaline, pure and clean. "Therefore," I announced to the stunned room, "I am officially calling for a vote of no confidence in our current Chief Executive Officer, Marcus Thorne." Gasps rippled around the table. Marcus's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. "This is insane. Simone, you can't." And, I continued, cutting him off cleanly, "I am presenting an alternative." On cue, a gentle knock came at the boardroom door. I had timed this perfectly with Chloe. I strode over and opened it. Chloe stood there, a stack of 10 thick, navy blue dossiers in her arms. She looked nervous but determined. She walked into the room and, with quiet efficiency, placed a copy of Project Phoenix in front of every single board member. She placed the last one directly in front of Marcus, who stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. I returned to the head of the table, standing in the spot Marcus had just vacated. I didn't need a PowerPoint. I had the truth. "For the past year," I began, my voice ringing with a newfound authority, "this board has been presented with a narrative of innovation and aggressive growth. I'm here to present you with the reality." I gestured to the dossier. "If you'll turn to page 3, you'll see a full accounting of the Velostang Racing sponsorship. A $2 million expenditure that has yielded, to date, a grand total of 3 unqualified leads and $0 in revenue. It is, in short, a monument to ego, paid for with shareholder money." I paused, letting that sink in. I could see them flipping the pages, their eyes wide. "On page 7, you will find a comparative analysis of the Aerolux software versus the Logicore system I originally proposed. As you can see, the system our CEO chose has resulted in a 40% increase in operational downtime and has cost this company an extra $700,000 in fees and lost productivity. On page 12, you will see the real-world performance data for our Zephyr fleet. a 22% higher maintenance cost, and a 9% drop in our on-time delivery rate, the single most important metric in our entire business. We are not projecting success. We are actively destroying our reputation for reliability. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The numbers were shouting for me. Marcus was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. This is a personal attack. She's twisting the numbers. Arthur Kowalski, my gruff operations director, whom I had invited to wait outside with Chloe, chose that moment to speak up from the doorway. The numbers are right, he said, his voice a low rumble of authority. My guys are working 80-hour weeks to fix problems that never should have happened. Her plan, he nodded towards the dossier, is the first sensible thing I've seen on paper in 2 years. It's a plan that works in the real world, not just in a fancy boardroom. That was the second blow. Arthur's credibility with the operational side of the business was unassailable. Finally, I went for the kill. And on page 20, I said, my voice dropping slightly, you will find the personnel file and full expense history of a man named Greg Peterson, our so-called VP of Synergistic Growth. Our CEO's college roommate, who, for a salary of $300,000 a year, has been treating our company like his personal ATM, with the full knowledge and approval of Marcus. That was it. The final nail. The room was utterly silent, save for the frantic rustling of pages as every board member turned to the section on Greg. The evidence was undeniable. The forged expense reports, the absurd justifications, the sheer, naked corruption of it all. Marcus looked at Eleanor Vance, his last hope. His face was pleading. She looked up from the dossier, her eyes cold as chips of ice. She didn't even look at him. She looked at me, and she nodded. Just a small, sharp dip of her chin. It was over. The chairman, a stoic man named Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat. A vote has been called, he said, his voice grim. All those in favor of the motion of no confidence in Mr. Thorne as CEO? Every single hand around the table went up. Instantly. Including Eleanor's. It was unanimous. And all those in favor of appointing Ms. Simone Hayes as interim CEO, effective immediately, to oversee the implementation of the recovery plan known as Project Phoenix? Again, every hand went up. No hesitation. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, a wave of dizzying, triumphant vertigo washing over me. I had done it. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus just stood there, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. The mask of charisma and confidence had been completely shattered, and underneath was just a bewildered, defeated man. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a question he couldn't seem to voice. How? I simply met his gaze, my expression calm, my victory quiet and total. I wasn't emotional. I was the CEO. The aftermath of the boardroom coup was swift and strangely quiet. The moment the vote concluded, a new reality snapped into place. The board members, their faces a mixture of relief and residual shock, stood up one by one to shake my hand. Congratulations, Simone, Eleanor Vance said, her grip firm, her eyes conveying a deep, newfound respect. You should have done this a year ago. We were fools not to listen. It was the validation I had craved for so long, but in that moment, I realized I no longer needed it. I had validated myself. Marcus didn't say a word. While the board members were formally congratulating me, he gathered his briefcase and his ridiculously expensive fountain pen and walked out of the room. He didn't look back. It was a silent, ignominious exit. By the time I walked out of the boardroom and into the main office area, the news had already spread like wildfire. The open plan space, usually buzzing with conversation, was hushed. People were gathered in small, whispering clumps, stealing glances at me. They looked scared, uncertain. They didn't know if I was a savior or just a new kind of tyrant. My first stop was Chloe's desk. She was sitting there, trying to look busy, but her leg was bouncing with nervous energy. I walked up to her, and the entire analytics department fell silent. I leaned down and spoke softly, so only she could hear. I could not have done that without you. What you did today took immense courage. Thank you. Her eyes welled up with tears of relief. I just reported the data, Simone, she whispered back. No, I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. You told the truth. And starting today, that's what this company is going to be about. I gave her a small smile and moved on, leaving her with the stunned but happy faces of her colleagues. My next stop was the warehouse. I found Arthur in his small, cluttered office, a satisfied, grim smile on his face. He stood up as I entered. Well, he said. That was something. We have a lot of work to do, Arthur, I said, getting straight to the point. That plan isn't just paper. We start implementing it tomorrow. 6 a.m. His smile widened. I'll be here at 5, boss. He called me boss. It felt right. That evening, I drove home to the house that no longer felt like mine. I knew he would be there. His car was in the driveway. The house was dark and silent. I found him in our bedroom, an open suitcase on the bed. He was packing, but not with the frantic anger I had expected. His movements were slow, defeated. He didn't look at me as I entered. How could you do it, Simone? He asked the room, his voice flat and empty of its usual booming confidence. To me. In public. You humiliated me. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed. The anger I had held onto for a year had cooled, leaving behind only a hard, clear certainty. Humiliated you? I replied, my voice devoid of the emotion he always accused me of having. You stood in that boardroom and told our colleagues, our friends, that I was too emotional to be trusted. You systematically dismantled my reputation, erased my contributions, and treated me like an incompetent child. You did that in public week after week, month after month. What I did today wasn't humiliation, Marcus. It was a course correction. He finally turned to look at me, his face a mask of weary confusion. But we were a team. We were husband and wife. Were we? I asked, the question sharp and genuine. When you hired your friend to a do-nothing job for $300,000 of our money, was that a team decision? When you sank millions into a failing race car for your own ego, were we a team then? You didn't just push me out of the company, Marcus. You pushed me out of our marriage. You told everyone I was too emotional, but the most emotional I've been in a year was watching you burn our life's work to the ground because you couldn't stand to share the credit. He had no answer. He just stared at me, the reality of his own actions finally dawning on him. The business, I said, my voice final, is mine to fix. The marriage is over. You can have the house. I'll stay at a hotel until I find a new place. I turned and walked away, leaving him in the wreckage he had created. The next morning, I was at the office at 5:30 a.m. My first official day as CEO. I held an all-hands meeting at 9. I stood before my employees, not as a co-founder's wife, but as their leader. I was honest. I told them the company was in trouble. I told them mistakes had been made. I didn't blame Marcus by name. I didn't have to. I simply said the era of vanity projects and gut-feel decisions was over. Then, I laid out the first steps of Project Phoenix. My first act as CEO was to walk into Greg Peterson's empty office. He hadn't even bothered to show up, and have his nameplate removed from the door. An email went out announcing the immediate elimination of the VP of Synergistic Growth position. My second act was a phone call to the Velostang racing team, personally terminating our sponsorship contract, effective immediately, citing the breach of performance clauses. These weren't just cost-cutting measures. They were signals. They were decisive, public statements that a new order had arrived. The fear in the office began to transform into a palpable sense of hope. The age of sizzle was over. It was time to focus on the stake. 6 months flew by in a blur of intense, exhausting, and deeply satisfying work. Project Phoenix was in full swing. The last of the disastrous Zephyr trucks were sold at auction, and our new, reliable fleet was on the road, hitting a 99.2% on-time delivery rate. Arthur's team was energized, their morale higher than it had been in years. The Logicore software was fully implemented, and it worked exactly as I had known it would, seamlessly. Chloe, now my newly appointed Director of Strategy and Analytics, presented a report at our first profitable quarterly meeting in 2 years. Her data showed that client retention was back up, operational costs were down by 30%, and we were on a clear path to stability and growth. The company, which I had officially rebranded as Vanguard Logistics, was rising from the ashes. The divorce was proceeding, and it was during the final settlement negotiations that I had my last significant conversation with Marcus. He came to the meeting not with a lawyer, but alone, attempting to leverage the history that no longer existed between us. He looked older, diminished. He had tried to get a job with a competitor, but the story of his ousting from Apex had made the rounds. No one would touch him. He made one last, desperate appeal. You have to admit, Simone, he argued, his voice attempting a shadow of its old charismatic charm. You couldn't have done all this without the foundation I built. I looked at him across the polished table of the mediator's office, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not hatred, not even sadness. Only a kind of distant pity. You're right, Marcus. I couldn't have, I said, and for a second, a flicker of hope lit his eyes. I couldn't have done it without you. You built the perfect, most detailed example of exactly what not to do. You gave me a multi-million-dollar case study in mismanagement and ego. And for that invaluable lesson, I am genuinely grateful." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a flat, dull acceptance. He finally understood. I no longer needed his approval, I no longer feared his judgment, and I no longer saw him as anything but a mistake I had finally fully corrected. It's been 2 years now since that day in the boardroom. Vanguard Logistics is thriving. We moved out of the flashy, overpriced headquarters and into a practical, modern building that puts our operations team right next to our administrative staff. It's a space designed for collaboration, not for ego. Eleanor Vance is my board chair and has become a close friend and mentor, a source of wisdom and unwavering support. I am no longer Simone, the co-founder's wife. I am Simone Hayes, the CEO who saved the company. The woman who was once dismissed as too emotional is now praised in trade magazines for her passionate leadership and intuitive yet data-driven approach. It's funny how the narrative changes when you're the one holding the pen. Looking back, I realized that being underestimated was the greatest gift Marcus ever gave me. His dismissal became my camouflage. His condescension became my fuel. He was so busy looking down on me that he never saw me rising up beneath him. The very label he tried to brand me with, emotional, turned out to be my superpower. It was my deep, emotional connection to our shared dream that gave me the strength to fight for it when he was ready to let it burn. It was my passion that drove me to spend a year in the shadows, meticulously preparing for a battle he never saw coming. What he called emotional, I now call purpose. So, to anyone out there who has been made to feel small, who has had their passion dismissed as a flaw, I want you to remember this. Your voice has value, even if the people closest to you refuse to hear it. Your perspective matters. And sometimes the people who believe in you the least are the ones who motivate you the most. Trust your own data, trust your own intuition, and never, ever let someone else's definition of you become your reality. I hope my story can be a small reminder of that. I want to hear from you now. Share your story in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated, and how did you prove them wrong? Your stories are what make this community so powerful. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. And please subscribe for more stories of resilience and vindication. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and for listening. I wish you all the strength in the world to be the architects of your own victories.